My childhood was shaped by the village where I grew up, a small cluster of houses in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the wind. The place was so isolated that the only sounds we heard came from nature itself, the creaking of trees, the murmur of a stream winding between rocks, and the whispers of the wind, which at night seemed to carry ancient secrets. The village had a name, of course, but I never speak it aloud. There's a weight to it, as if each syllable serves as a reminder of all I've seen, of everything I've lost. When I think of it, I remember the smell of burning wood and the constant tolling of the church bells, marking the hours as if trying to keep time under control. But above all, I think of the well. The well stood at the center of the village, surrounded by a stone square worn down by time and by the footsteps of generations who lived there before me. It wasn't extraordinary at first glance, just an old circle of stones topped with a wooden structure, with a rusted bucket hanging from a rope. But there was something about it that made people avoid looking at it for too long. No one spoke of it directly, but it was evident. You'd never see children playing near the well, nor adults using it as a meeting point. It was there, at the heart of the village, but it was like a heart no one dared to hear beating. I grew up hearing stories about that well. Every family had its version. Some were subtle, like tales meant to scare children into coming home before dark. Others were so detailed and sinister, they kept me awake at night. My grandfather, a man of few words and a hardened expression, used to repeat a single phrase about the well. Never trust what casts no shadow. I never fully understood what he meant, but the way he looked at the well, as if seeing something no one else could, sent chills through me. My family lived on the edge of the village, where the houses began to drift apart from one another, as if even they wanted to keep their distance from the center. Our house was small, made of dark wood, with windows that creaked at the slightest touch of the wind. It was humble but comfortable, at least until the silence began to take over. As a child, I thought that silence was just part of life in the countryside, but over time, I realized there was something different about it. It wasn't the ordinary quiet of an isolated place. It was oppressive, growing heavier with each passing year, as if the whole village was holding its breath. Even so, I loved exploring the surroundings. There was something magical about the forests, the golden fields swaying under the afternoon sun, and the hills that offered views that seemed endless. But whenever my curiosity led me to the village center, where the well stood, I felt a strange heaviness, as if the air there was denser. Unintentionally, I avoided getting too close, always altering my path, just like everyone else. Now looking back, I realized my curiosity about the well grew slowly, fed by the stories, the wary glances of the villagers, and the whispers I heard on the stillest nights. I can't say for sure when I started hearing the song. Perhaps it had always been there, too faint to notice, but once I became aware of it, it never left me. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The melody was soft, almost imperceptible, something you might mistake for the wind or the sound of trees swaying in the distance. But there was something about it that caught my attention, something that felt human. It wasn't a cheerful or comforting tune. On the contrary, it was sad, almost desperate, like a lament coming from somewhere very, very deep. I tried to ignore it. God knows I tried. But the more I avoided thinking about the melody, the more it invaded my thoughts, creeping in at the most inopportune moments. And then I started noticing other things. The villagers had always been reserved, but as the years went by, it seemed even their shadows were pulling away from each other. Smiles were rare, laughter almost non-existent. Some began to vanish without warning, leaving no trace. No one spoke about it. It was as if everyone knew, but preferred to pretend nothing was happening. The only exception was my grandfather. He didn't disappear, but he changed in ways that still haunt me. He was a strong man, someone who faced storms and challenges without hesitation. But in the months leading up to his death, something in him broke. He stopped leaving the house, started talking to himself, and sometimes we'd find him standing by the window, staring toward the village center with eyes full of something I can only describe as absolute fear. When he died, we buried him in the village's small cemetery, near the hills he had loved so much. It was a gray day, with heavy clouds that seemed ready to collapse. After the funeral, my mother found something in his room, an old notebook filled with notes that made no sense. The words were scribbled so forcefully they almost tore the paper. But there was one phrase he repeated over and over, like a mantra. The song is a door. I didn't understand what it meant at the time, but the words stayed with me. They echoed in my mind on the quietest days when the wind stopped and the world seemed to hold its breath. In the months that followed my grandfather's death, the song became a constant presence in my life. I heard it in moments of absolute silence, like when everyone in the house was asleep and the world seemed to stop. At first, I thought it was something coming from within me, perhaps a memory, a fragment of a dream. But it soon became clear that wasn't the case. The melody was real, and it came from the well. I tried talking to my mother about it once, but she reacted as though I'd committed some kind of blasphemy. "Don't speak of it," she said, looking at me with a severity I had never seen before. "The more you think about it, the more it takes from you." Those words burned themselves into my mind, but instead of deterring me, they only sparked my curiosity further. One night, unable to bear the weight of the mystery any longer, I decided to leave the house and go to the well. It was a moonless night, and the stars seemed distant, as if they were watching from far away what I was about to do. I walked down the dirt path to the square at the center of the village, my heart pounding in my chest. Each step echoed in the silence around me. When I reached the square, I was overcome by a strange sensation, as if time moved differently there. The air was still, yet it carried a scent I couldn't identify, something between wet earth and rusted iron. The well stood in its usual place, but that night it seemed different, taller, older, as if it had grown in the hours I'd been away. I approached cautiously, every movement accompanied by the sound of the melody. Now it was clearer, sharper. There was no doubt it was coming from the well. I hesitated for a moment before leaning over the edge to peer inside. The darkness within was absolute. Even with my eyes accustomed to the dim light, I couldn't see anything beyond an infinite void. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the sound was rising. It wasn't as though something was coming up from the depths. It felt more like the melody itself was drawing closer, slowly but surely. I should have stepped back. Anyone with sense would have turned and run home. But there was something about that moment that held me in place. It was as though the well had extended an invisible hand and seized my spirit. My legs were frozen, my hands clammy with sweat. And then I heard it. It wasn't just a melody, it was words. They were whispered, but not in a language I recognized. Yet somehow I understood them. The words begged me to descend, to reach the bottom and free whatever was trapped below. They promised answers, secrets, and power. "You will see what others cannot," they said. "You will be the one to awaken what sleeps." I felt an almost uncontrollable urge to obey. My feet moved on their own, and before I realized it, I was holding the rope of the bucket, leaning further into the well. The darkness seemed to call to me, like an embrace that promised as much comfort as destruction. "Stop!" A voice rang out behind me, cutting through the trance I was in. I turned quickly, nearly losing my balance. It was old Marguerite, one of the village's longest-living residents. She was known for her brusque demeanor and bizarre stories, but that night, her face was filled with sheer terror. "You can't do that," she said, approaching me with hesitant steps. "You don't know what you're trying to wake." I just wanted to understand," I stammered, still feeling the echo of the well's words in my mind. Margaret grabbed my arm tightly, her thin fingers digging into my skin. "Hearing it is already dangerous," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But to descend is to accept the invitation. And those who go down never come back the same." There was something in her eyes, something that made me believe every word she said. But even so, my curiosity wasn't satisfied. Before she could pull me away completely, I asked, "What's down there? What is this song?" She hesitated, glancing around as if afraid something might be listening. Then, finally, she said, "It's what remains of a broken promise, something betrayed and buried, something that should never have been forgotten." Her words were vague, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. She pulled me away from the well and escorted me back home. But the sound of the song stayed with me, even after I locked myself in my room. That night, I dreamed of the well. In the dream, I was there again, but this time, something was slowly rising from the depths. I couldn't see what it was, but I felt its presence, a crushing force that seemed to fill every space around me. When I woke up, sweating and trembling, I realized my curiosity still wasn't satisfied. Margaret had tried to pull me away, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The well had something to show me, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The days following my encounter with Margaret were a blur of restlessness and obsession. I knew I should stay away, but the melody felt like it was inside me now, pulsing in sync with my heart. No matter what I did, working in the fields, talking to neighbors, or even locking myself in my room, it was always there, calling, begging, demanding that I return. I tried to ignore it, but that only made things worse. One night, I woke up with the eerie feeling that something was watching me. I looked at the window, and in the glass reflection, I saw the shadow of someone standing behind me. I spun around quickly, but no one was there. That's when I realized the well wouldn't leave me alone. If I didn't go back willingly, it would find a way to force me. That same night, without fully understanding why, I left the house and walked to the square. The world felt different, as though it was covered by a thin, distorted veil. When I arrived at the well, the melody was louder than ever, almost deafening. It was no longer a distant whisper. It was a chorus, an orchestra of voices that seemed to fill the air around me. I knew I was breaking the promise I had made to myself, to Marguerite, and even to my grandfather, but it no longer mattered. Something inside me needed to know what was down there. I grabbed the rope with trembling hands and began to descend. The descent felt endless. The moonlight disappeared quickly, and the only thing accompanying me was the melody, which now seemed to come from everywhere. My hands slipped on the damp rope, and the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something metallic. Each meter I descended felt like it pulled me further from the world above, as if I were entering a realm that did not belong to the living. Finally, my feet touched the bottom. It was deeper than I had expected, and the ground was covered by a thin layer of stagnant water. The melody abruptly stopped, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like it was screaming in my ears. I turned on the flashlight I had brought and illuminated the space around me. The bottom of the well was not what I expected. It wasn't just dirt and stones. There were symbols carved into the walls, intricate patterns that seemed to faintly pulse in the light of the flashlight. In the center of the well, something was buried. A stone? A chest? I couldn't tell right away. But instinctively, I knew that it was the heart of the mystery. I approached it cautiously, my breath echoing in the confined space. When I touched the object, a strange warmth surged through my hand, as if it were alive. It was a stone lid, and beneath it something was locked away, something ancient, something that should not be awakened. And then before I could decide what to do, I heard the voice again. "Release me," it said, clear as day. It wasn't a request, it was a command. My hands began to move on their own, pushing against the lid with a strength I didn't know I had. The stone gave way, and a horrid stench of decay escaped, nearly making me vomit. From the hole I had just uncovered, something began to emerge. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal. It was an indistinct form, made of shadows and flesh, with eyes that burned like embers. It rose slowly, filling the space with an overwhelming presence. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, unable to do anything but watch. "You've done well," the creature said, its voice reverberating inside my head. "For centuries, I have waited for this moment. You are the last of your bloodline, the final guardian, and now you shall be my passage." Before I could understand what it meant, an unbearable pain coursed through my body. The creature moved forward, and in an instant, it was inside me. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the silence of the well. My vision darkened, and the world around me disappeared. When I woke up, I was back in the square. The well was sealed again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew I wasn't the same. There was something inside me now, something that whispered in my mind, promising power and knowledge, but also hunger. A hunger that couldn't be satisfied by food or drink. In the days that followed, I began to notice changes. My skin grew paler, my eyes more sunken. The villagers looked at me with suspicion, as if they somehow knew I was no longer just myself. And then the disappearances began. First it was a child, then an entire family. I couldn't remember what I had done, but deep down, I knew. The thing inside me was feeding. And with every life it took, I felt my humanity slipping further and further away. Now as I write this, I know it's too late for me. The creature is too strong, and I am just a fragment of who I once was. I don't know how much longer I have before I disappear completely, before it takes full control. But if you're reading this, heed my warning. Never go near the well. No matter how much it calls, no matter what it promises, some things are meant to stay buried. And if you ever hear the melody, cover your ears and run, because once it finds you, it never lets you go. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more.